get my 6. Greetings, everybody. Just heard a howl back here in the woods behind me. It's almost as if I said greetings, everybody, and someone or something greeted me back. Could it have been potentially a Bigfoot Sasquatch? Well, potentially. So keep looking back here as I actually bring you a very special gift today, an early Christmas gift of sorts. It's been brought to my attention just today that one of the most highly sought, highly wished for Christmas gifts this year is actually Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Anthology 1, volumes 1 through 10. This 800-page long, 3-pound collection, largest collection of Bigfoot Sasquatch stories in the history of literature, written by this guy. So I know a lot of folks are still reeling financially because of COVID. I know a lot of folks were reeling financially before COVID because times are just tough sometimes without pandemics. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to read you a story from this collection. Now listen to me, but continue to watch behind me in case he, she, it, or they show up. Been getting some weird things in some of these videos lately. So this one comes from Bigfoot Sasquatch Files Volume 4. Okay, again, this anthology is volumes 1 through 10 combined. Available with an autograph and a really cool bookmark, of course, if you get it from our Etsy store. The link's in the description box below. It says, Crazy Lake and Bigfoot Sasquatch always have my 6. This is a story about greed. There's some adult situations in it. I don't think there's any adult language. There is quite a bit of that stuff in this volume. Please understand that before you purchase it. If you do, if I see any bad words, I'll switch them on the fly here. But it's a story called Publish or Perish. And I know thousands upon thousands of you have already read this, but a lot of you say you like to hear the stories when I read them. And for those of you who have not heard it, I hope you enjoy this. As my beautiful bride dearly, aka Giggly Girl, would say, with no further ado, it's time to get to the story. Publish or Perish. Professor Parrish sat at the campfire with his 6 trusted students. These were the half dozen who'd made it through his trial by fire. 46 students had begun the experiment, but only these 6 remained. He did his best to keep his eyes from favoring Marta, his favorite of these 6 elite, but it was difficult because he was only human, and a very healthy male human at that, and Marta was drop-dead gorgeous. 22, half black on her father's side and half Thai on her mother's, Blasian, as the cool kids said, and she was 100% gorgeous, Dr. Parrish thought. So when does the first test begin, Marta asked, as the group sat in a circle around the stoned blaze. Any time now, Dr. Parrish said, though most likely it will happen after dark. Why is that? Ricky asked. Dr. Parrish hated Ricky because he had good reason to believe Marta was crushing on Ricky. Ricky was good looking and he was pretty intelligent, but, well, Dr. Parrish was hoping Marta might crush on him. Unfortunately, the girl showed no signs of daddy issues, so at nearly 50 years old, Dr. Parrish would simply have to accept living with fantasies when it came to all things Marta. But he decided he'd still hate Ricky anyway, just for the sake of things. I think you'll understand when the time comes, Dr. Parrish said. Had Marta asked the question, he would have rambled on for half an hour or so, trying to impress her with big words and such. But Ricky, well, reference that last paragraph. I've never been camping before, Alice said. Alice was okay for a freshman, actually highly intelligent and pretty mature, but she had a tendency to talk too much about stuff no one cared about. Dr. Parrish didn't respond to her comment, but someone else did, Sarah perhaps. Dr. Parrish wasn't paying attention. He was reminiscing in his mind, not just about the social experiment he was carrying out, or the fame that would certainly come his way once he published his results, or the tenure that the university would no doubt grant him because of it, or of getting into Marta's pants, but about what happened at this very campsite with Dr. Parrish and his childhood best friend, a man who'd been killed in Afghanistan during the war about a decade before, and of how he knew he was going back on the promise he'd made with his now deceased friend, and of how he did not care. Once upon a time, Dr. Parrish was simply known as Billy, and his best friend, before being known as Army Sergeant First Class Byron Jones, was simply known as Byron. And Billy and Byron spent every waking hour of their youth together, either on the riverbanks catching trout or in the woods hunting deer and turkeys. Many of their adventures were had during overnight and weekend camping trips here at Byron's grandfather's place, a small homestead a couple miles outside of the city limits of their small Appalachian town. The property wasn't big enough to be considered a farm, and the old man never raised any livestock. He had a couple of garden spots is all, but it was secluded, out in the middle of nowhere, and when the sun went down, it was as dark as a coal miner's backside, unless the moon was full, at which time you could see almost as if it were daytime, and it was peaceful and pleasant, and it held the best memories of their youth. And it was haunted, or something, but it definitely had a Bigfoot Sasquatch living on it, because that one fall back in October of 1987, Billy and Byron saw it. The importance of having water when you do this, for when you swallow one of those tiny little bugs. Okay, so they saw it in 87. Or her, or him, or they, because it may or may not have been alone. And neither of them had ever forgotten. And that had only been the first time they'd seen it. The creature, or creatures, obviously felt safe in the boys' presence, and out of curiosity, when the boys would stay at Byron's grandfather's place, out in the middle of nowhere, they would often come right up to them while the boys were sitting around the campfire at night. Sure, they'd kept their distance so everyone involved would feel safe, but the boys could always make out their eyes shine and the outlines of their bodies. The boys never felt threatened in their presence, and they knew they had something special, and they'd made a pact somewhere around 1990, senior year, that no matter what, neither of them would ever disclose the fact that there was potentially a small clan of Bigfoot Sasquatch living on Byron's grandfather's land. And they'd cut their hands and became blood brothers on a handshake to seal the deal. But Byron got obliterated by a roadside bomb just outside of Kandahar in 2009. And Billy's wife left him for a woman in 2012. And the university refused to grant him tenure because of his extracurricular activities with beautiful young co-eds. Oh, if only he could get Marta to join that list. So Billy was reneging on his pact with Byron, and to hell with the safety of those Bigfoot Sasquatches. Whatever came to them after the disclosure of their existence and location was no concern to Billy. He needed the tenure. He needed the security, and he wanted Marta, and if he didn't publish something of substance soon, he knew he would perish, professionally and then personally. Dr. Parrish had to do something that had never been done before and document it, or Dr. Parrish would become Dr. Perished. Dr. Parrish had begun his social experiment at the beginning of the semester, the fall semester, and how fitting that here the finalists were sitting around the campfire at Byron's granddad's place in October, the very month of the first encounter Billy and Byron had had with the creatures all those years ago. The first test was simple. All 46 volunteers stood in a circle. Dr. Parrish whispered in the first participant's ear, "My wife left me for a woman." The thing of it all was that volunteer then had to whisper the exact same thing into the ear of the volunteer beside them. And so it went around the circle until they came to the end. And then the final volunteer loudly proclaimed the secret that had been passed around. The first trial saw half the students eliminated. "Your brother slept with your mother?" the final student both asked and proclaimed at the end of it. Dr. Parrish then walked back the cat, as they call it in the CIA, and you did not read that here or hear that here, a process by which you go backward with your information seeking. The final student who stated the wrong information was not kicked out of the study because the student just in front of them admitted that that was exactly what he'd told her. The difficulty lied in finding the broken links of the chain. Who flubbed it up? Several trials had to be done, and Dr. Parrish's wife, leaving him for a woman, was retold as his father was really his brother and his uncle was gay, and in one trial that his mother knew why the sky was blue, all before the trial was over and successful. Dr. Parrish was convinced some of the students were flubbing things up on purpose, just because they were being a-holes. But he did point out with each trial that this was a prime example of how rumors get started and spread, and why you should believe very little of what you hear when it comes to gossip. Don't believe anything you hear, Dr. Parrish told his student volunteers, and only half of what you see. But he'd finally narrowed the field down to a dozen. And then came the next set of trials, witness account trials. Dr. Parrish would have all 1 dozen of his students observe an act, such as a dog walking through a park, unleashed, and then urinating on a tree or a trash can, and then trotting back to its human to be leashed. He would then have the students write exactly what had happened in the fewest amount of words as possible, and once again, he was not amazed to find how many of these students, literally half, had difficulty in either remembering and notating things exactly as they'd happened, or at least being able to put the events that had occurred in properly worded fashion. One student had the dog urinating on a tree when it had clearly urinated on a trash can. One student said the dog was big and black when it was clearly small and brown. With the final 6 student volunteers expelled from the study, Dr. Parrish finally had the 6th that he needed. These 6 were good at repeating stories exactly as they'd heard them, and they were good at writing stories about events exactly as they had occurred. In a word, they were credible. That's actually 3 words. "What was that?" Marta asked, turning to look behind her. Darkness had fallen now, and she couldn't see a thing that was any further than a foot behind her. She'd been staring into the light of the fire, hence she was blinded for the darkness. "I heard it too," Ricky said. Dr. Parrish didn't know if Ricky had actually heard anything or if he was just supporting Marta. GDU, Ricky, Dr. Parrish thought to himself, "Don't F this up over a piece of A. I need this." Well, there's a lot of bad words in that sentence. Oh. Just as Marta turned around to face the fire again, a sound came from the woods behind her that everyone in the group heard. They all turned to look, and there, about 10 feet away, stood a being that had to be at least 10 feet tall. Everyone present could see the shining of its eyes as the fire reflected off of them. "Oh my God," Alice said. "Everyone's okay," Dr. Parrish said. "There's no need to panic. If you'd feel more comfortable coming over here and sitting on this side of the fire so your back isn't to it, feel free. Just move slowly so that you don't scare it away. I can assure you it's not going to hurt any of us." "How can you be so sure?" Alice asked. "Because I've been coming here and seeing these creatures for longer than you guys have been alive," Dr. Parrish said. The students sitting on the opposite side of the fire as Dr. Parrish took him up on his recommendation and joined him and the others on their side of the fire. They sat in silence, staring at the hulking dark figure that was not supposed to be real. 5 minutes later, another creature, this one about 7 feet tall, stepped out of the darkness and joined it. "I've never seen 2 together," Dr. Parrish said. "They must be really curious about you guys." A minute later, another came out, this one about 5 feet tall. "I think they're a family," Marta said. "I'll be," Dr. Parrish said. He was completely amazed. The family of Bigfoot Sasquatch stared at the campers as the campers stared back for about 10 more minutes, and then, just as mysteriously as they'd shown up, they slipped back into the cover of darkness and were gone. 30 days later, Dr. Parrish was a worldwide celebrity. He'd published his piece on the existence of Bigfoot Sasquatch, and not only had he been given tenure by the university, but he'd already earned more money being paid for speaking engagements on the weekends than he would earn all year from his professorship. Sadly, he'd not gotten anywhere with Marta, but that was okay, because he knew in time that might change. At least he hoped so. And now, on a crisp, cool Saturday morning just before Thanksgiving, he was preparing to earn $100,000 from a speaking engagement, which he'd hyped up by publicizing that he would now reveal the location of the Bigfoot Sasquatch family that he and his credible, trusted student aides had observed. And Marta was pissed. None of the other students cared much about the success that Dr. Parrish was having as a result of his publication. They were happy for him at most, but beyond that, they had other things to do, like go tailgating at the university's football games, partying balls all night after the games, win or lose, partying balls on the nights when there were no games to win or lose. But Marta, well, she was different. Marta was an empath, and she could feel much more than even a PhD in sociology like Dr. Parrish could imagine, because she knew the higher one's education, the less likely one is to believe in things such as empaths. Marta had known from the day she met him that Dr. Parrish had dirty thoughts about her. She could tell he was a self-centered narcissist, not unlike many professors she'd known during her college years, and she could tell he was self-seeking. Still, she thought he was okay, and she jumped at the chance to be in his experiment because binge drinking around campus was not her thing, and her gut instinct had told her during the entire experiment that the man was doing something for personal gain. Marta made sure to be in attendance today with the thousands of others in attendance at the university's baseball stadium. There was a home football game today, or they would have used the football stadium in order to sell more tickets, as well as the millions and millions of people at home watching the live stream feeds. Today, Dr. Parrish stated, after rambling about how important he was for about 10 minutes, "I will disclose to the world the very location of the small family of Bigfoot Sasquatches my trusted students and I observed, and the world of science and curiosity seekers alike can descend upon the location, and the world can now see for themselves." The crowd cheered at him. So many people already had their car keys in hand, ready to go to this mysterious location so they could see a Bigfoot Sasquatch for themselves. "The exact location of these creatures," Dr. Parrish said. And then he took a dramatic pause in order to bask in the glory of such a large crowd's utter silence. "He's lying!" A beautiful, dark-skinned girl with long black hair shouted from the middle of the crowd. "I was there. I was one of his aides. It was all a hoax for his fame and fortune, and it's gone on long enough." The crowd gasped, making it sound as if the air had just been released from the tiny, tight nozzles of 10,000 car tires all at once. Dr. Parrish was floored. He knew not what to say. He stared out at Marta, now realizing that any fantasies he had that involved her would never be fulfilled. "He never promised us money," Marta said, continuing after the crowd ceased gasping. "He didn't bribe us. We did it all on our own accord because, like him, we wanted to see how gullible the masses were." At this, the crowd began murmuring. They, the masses, were offended. "It was all a social experiment," Marta said. "This was all just one big social experiment, and you've all been duped. There's no such thing as Bigfoot Sasquatch." And with that, Marta simply walked away, first down the aisle where she'd been seated, and then out the front gates of the stadium. As soon as she exited the stadium, everyone in attendance stood up and did the same. "Wait," Dr. Parrish shouted. "She's lying." No one listened to him, because no one cared. They knew they'd been duped. They were all the butt of his big joke. They all knew that there is no such thing as Bigfoot Sasquatch. Dr. Parrish lost his tenure. He was not paid for the day's event. He was fired from the university, and he could not find new employment in academia because his career was done. In a word, Dr. Parrish had become Dr. Perished. There you go. You know, we used to say in Wall Street when I was a stockbroker, sometimes the bulls win, sometimes the bears, but pigs always get slaughtered. And Dr. Parrish, who is now Dr. Perished, found that out for himself in this story. Hope you enjoyed the story. And again, you can get it on Amazon, print, or Kindle, or from our Etsy store. The link's in the description box below. It comes autographed. Really cool bookmark. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Make sure to tune in tomorrow for, I don't know, whatever the hell this channel's about. See you then.